Hey guys, welcome back to Wrestle News 365. Hope everyone is doing very, very well. There is a lot of WWE news to talk about today, so we're going to go through some of the major stories over the last 24 hours. And we're going to start off with The Undertaker. Everyone is talking about The Undertaker, of course, Survivor Series. It's 30 years of The Undertaker. It's The Undertaker saying his final farewell to the WWE at the event. So recently, over the last couple of days, The Undertaker, some of his friends, his kayfabe brother Kane, they've all been making the rounds in the media, hyping up Survivor Series, talking about The Undertaker. So we've got a lot of interesting stories about the Dead Man and Survivor Series, including one in which it has been revealed that several BSK members are attending The Undertaker's final farewell at Survivor Series. This comes from Wrestling Inc., where Wrestling Inc. managing editor Nick Hausman had an interview with SAVIO VEGA and discussed a variety of topics, including The Undertaker's final farewell and all things BSK, the Bone Street Crew, the infamous backstage faction in WWE. SAVIO VEGA has confirmed to the honorary BSK member Hausman at Wrestling Inc. that he will be attending Survivor Series for The Undertaker's final farewell. SAVIO VEGA said, "Yes, I got a call on Friday of last week before I got on the plane to New York City, and I was asked if I'd like to be in this big moment of The Undertaker / Mark Calloway's career. I'll be there as a friend, as a wrestler, and as a BSK member. And when they called me and asked if I'd be there, of course, why not? He's my friend, he's a good person, so on the 21st I'm flying to Orlando and we're going to be at Survivor Series on the 22nd. Now it was also asked, obviously rightfully so, given that SAVIO VEGA is going to be there, he was asked, so what are you going to be doing at Survivor Series? You're going to be backstage, you're going to be in the ring. But SAVIO VEGA said all he knows at this point is that he's going to be there. He doesn't know exactly what he's going to be doing. Vega said, quote, "So far, I'm just going to be there. Some of the BSK members are going to be there, and we'll see what happens. I hope something happens there. I'm just happy to be with my crew, my guys. You've got Fatu, Rikishi, you got Papa Shango / The Godfather, and you got Taker, and you got the Godwins. I mean, I'm just happy for that." Now, obviously, also with The Undertaker, this final farewell has raised the question once again whether if this is an official Undertaker retirement, if it's part of an angle, what's going on with The Undertaker and the WWE. SAVIO VEGA in this interview said he wasn't sure if The Undertaker will truly retire. He noted that if you're going to retire, you don't come back unless the fans demand it. Now, obviously, SAVIO VEGA, as he mentions in this next quote, is cut his teeth in Puerto Rico where people retire all the time. Vega said, quote, "I can't tell you because I don't know. I don't know what the plan is. Maybe it's a retirement. This is my experience with retirements in Puerto Rico. Carlos Colon retired. Then 6 months later, he came back because, I don't know, we needed to make a big house. Then he later retired a couple months later. The people lose interest in those retirements because when you do a retirement, you retire. You're out of the picture. And you continue coming back and back. Don't tell the people you're going to retire and come back." He then followed this up with said, "I believe in this case, Taker doesn't need to come back. He's had a few injuries. I believe that he feels good right now, working out and taking care of him and his family. And I believe they're going to do a retirement and it has to be for real. If they do a comeback, it would have to be a comeback where the fans want that comeback. Maybe one more night." So, as I mentioned, SAVIO VEGA is going to be at Survivor Series. BSK, the Bone Street Crew, look like they're also going to be at Survivor Series, which to me says this is a legitimate retirement. I know a lot of people are speculating, are they trying to do this major angle? Is The Undertaker going to come back for one more match at WrestleMania? There's been a lot of discussion about The Undertaker facing The Fiend. Bray Wyatt on Monday Night Raw as well has had the 1911 code in some of his Firefly Funhouse vignettes and promos, which has led to people speculating, oh, maybe The Undertaker and The Fiend are going to have the match. That does seem like the match if The Undertaker was going to come back, if The Undertaker was going to have that final WrestleMania match in front of people, considering he didn't have his final match in front of any crowd this year because of the pandemic, and he had that cinematic match against AJ Styles at WrestleMania 36. It does feel that if he were to come back, and the big emphasis on if there, if he was to come back, it would be against The Fiend at WrestleMania. So, naturally, given The Fiend doesn't have anything scheduled for Survivor Series just yet, he's involved with the whole Randy Orton, Drew McIntyre WWE Championship picture, but we know that isn't going to happen at Survivor Series because Randy Orton's facing Roman Reigns, champion versus champion. So we know that The Fiend isn't scheduled to do anything at Survivor Series, which has led people to speculate we're going to have this angle of The Undertaker saying his final farewell to the WWE, and then The Fiend comes out, confrontation match at WrestleMania, and that's The Undertaker's true last match in a stadium, in front of a crowd, etc. I just don't see that, given that we've got the BSK people coming, given the hype that's around this, given that it's 30 years of The Undertaker. I truly think at this point that it is going to be a real retirement. But even I say that, I think that is the case. I wouldn't be surprised if they did an angle, but I don't think they will. I don't think they will. Because as I mentioned, The Undertaker's been doing a lot of media and he's been talking to a lot of outlets about retirement, about his WWE career. He obviously did a lot of media with the Last Ride documentary series on the WWE Network, but he's spoken about his goals following his WWE retirement. This also comes from Wrestling Inc., who's reporting an interview that The Undertaker did with Sony Sports India, and The Undertaker was asked if there's anything left to achieve in WWE. Does he have any future ambitions? And The Undertaker said, realistically, he doesn't want to tarnish his image at this point, and he doesn't want to disappoint fans by performing at a certain level that is expected of him. The Undertaker said he exceeded all of his personal goals in the business, and he also noted his new goals are related to helping the next generation of WWE superstars. Taker said, quote, "I think the legacy is there, and I want that legacy not to be tarnished." And that was part of the reason to finally call it a day. It becomes more and more of a physical challenge to go out and perform at the level people expect when they come to see The Undertaker. My career, I have exceeded all my personal goals, and I never could have imagined a 30-year non-stop career with WWE. In our world, that just not happen that often to stay at one place for that long. I am very proud of the fact that once I got to WWE, I never left. All my dreams, all my goals I have reached. And now it's time to make new goals and pay all my experiences, pay it forward to the new guys that are coming up behind me. So once again, The Undertaker, as I mentioned, it's just so unique and so strange, isn't it? Because for years and years, we have been accustomed to not hearing anything from The Undertaker. Getting The Undertaker out of character, doing interviews just didn't happen. Very, very, very rare. I mean, very rare. He was the ultimate kayfabe, even at the likes of the Hall of Fame. You know, he would only appear once, which was the Paul Bearer Hall of Fame induction, and he came out in the full Undertaker character. That is what Mark Calloway did. He lived and breathed the gimmick. He is and was probably the last true person to have kayfabe, I think we'll probably see. Obviously, as I mentioned Bray Wyatt earlier, people have said similar things about Bray Wyatt, that he's trying to keep up kayfabe, but even Bray Wyatt does interviews. I mean, we saw those virtual meet and greet videos came out a couple of weeks ago, and Bray Wyatt was talking to fans in that. And that's just 2020. That's 2020. That is the modern day pro wrestler. Kayfabe, it really doesn't exist that much anymore. The Undertaker really was the last bastion of kayfabe. And now that he's doing these interviews, this was another sign to me that The Undertaker was probably truly done, was that the kayfabe of The Undertaker character had disappeared. The mystique had disappeared. And it was a shock, and it still is a bit of a shock, and it still is quite jarring to see The Undertaker do all of these interviews. But given the interviews that he's doing, given the comments that he is saying, it does suggest to me that I think he's done. I think he's done, and I think it's the right call. I do think it's the right call. I've spoken about maybe there's a desire from his point of view to have one more match in a stadium in front of a crowd, considering that he wasn't able to end his career that way. Instead of being in a stadium at WrestleMania in front of 60, 70 or 80,000 fans, instead it was in a mock cemetery somewhere in Florida with a crew of maybe 20 people during a pandemic. Nevertheless, I think the story was there, and I think the story is important in that, and that's really what The Undertaker, I think, lives on. You look at that Last Ride documentary series, he was always looking for the perfect out. Those last few years, he was meant to retire against Roman Reigns at 2017. The reason he came back is because that match was so bad, and he was so out of shape that he felt it necessary to right the wrong. And every time he came back, it was just something that wasn't quite there for him to say, you know what, that was the way to end it. Whether it was facing John Cena at WrestleMania 34. He looked great, he felt great, but the match lasted, 90 seconds. Then he's having matches against Triple H and DX. They didn't go well. So he felt, I can't end it there. I can't end it there because it didn't feel right. Then it's missing WrestleMania, and it's the case of, actually, I want to come back. Then it's facing Goldberg. We know how that went. And then it's having that match with Roman Reigns against Drew McIntyre and Shane McMahon, and that did go well. And then after that match, once again, he starts to say to himself, you know what, I'm done. That was a good way to end it if I wanted to end it. Then it's a case of, well, maybe I should end it at WrestleMania. And with the AJ Styles match, it was the perfect ending. It was the perfect ending. Now, regardless if it was cinematic or not, it was the perfect ending. It was him riding off into the darkness, his character riding off into the darkness, shifting more from The Undertaker to Mark Calloway as well during that match, which again is the perfect transition to Undertaker post-retirement. He's no longer the dead man, he's Mark Calloway now, and he became Mark Calloway for that match against AJ Styles in the Boneyard match at WrestleMania. It all just worked, and I think The Undertaker is a veteran enough to know when the story is right and the book is closed, the chapter is over, and I think The Undertaker realizes that anything coming back now and having those match, it could be better. It could be an even better ending, but you have to know when to cash in your chips per se and say, you know what, I think I'm good. I think that was the right way to end it. And I think The Undertaker knows that at this point. At least I would hope so. For me, the desire isn't there to see him in the ring again as a fan. I love The Undertaker. He's one of my favourite superstars of all time. For me, he's on the Mount Rushmore, especially of characters. The greatest character in professional wrestling history is The Undertaker, and you're never going to see that longevity again from any WWE superstar at that level and that consistency and that amount of respect. You're just not going to see it. You're not going to see it ever again. Nevertheless, I don't want to see him in the ring again. I've had my fill of The Undertaker, and I think he's had his fill of being in the ring as well. I think he knows, and I think he probably has known for the last at least 3 years that, you know what, I really do need to be finishing up, because I'm done. And some people can get out of their system quicker than others, but I think The Undertaker has finally got out of his system. Now, still talking about The Undertaker here, given that his last match against AJ Styles at WrestleMania, as I mentioned, was that Boneyard match and was a cinematic wrestling match, there has been a lot of discussion and talk about whether or not The Undertaker could continue wrestling for WWE if he just had cinematic matches. But it looks like The Undertaker isn't interested at all in extending his WWE career via these cinematic matches. Now, as I mentioned, The Undertaker wrestled his last WrestleMania match, or his last match at WrestleMania 36, defeating AJ Styles in a Boneyard match, which, as I mentioned, was critically acclaimed. It received rave reviews for its cinematic presentation, and its all-around action was a fitting end to the first night of WrestleMania, as it took place over 2 nights this year. Many believe that The Undertaker could extend his career by working a cinematic match each year at WrestleMania. It was something that I even floated back in April, but the Phenom doesn't seem too keen on this idea. He said, quote, when he was speaking to the New York Post, "It really doesn't appeal to me because basically what it is working around my limitations. It's capitalizing on some of my ability and some of my creative ability to tell a story, but basically it's trying to mask some of the lack of my physical abilities at this point." Now, even though The Undertaker believes working cinematic matches would prolong his career, he feels resorting to that style would be, quote, cheating. He said, "I realized I've taken every physical gift tool that I have and I have used it up. There's no water left in the sponge, if I can use that analogy. I've wrung everything I could get out of that sponge," he said. Now, The Undertaker mentioned that he is still training, but he's not training for a match. He's just working out to stay in shape. Now, as I mentioned, when it comes to the cinematic matches with The Undertaker, I mentioned it as I was reading that out there. The Undertaker, that cinematic match at WrestleMania earlier this year, the Boneyard match with AJ Styles, I was one of the people that said at the time that it opened up a lot of possibilities for the older wrestlers, for the elderly wrestlers in professional wrestling, because I think they looked at that match and the wheels started to turn in my head, and they must have been turning in the head of the people in WWE. I know they were turning in the heads of fans, that you looked at The Undertaker in that match, you go, well, it's smoke and mirrors. It's kind of like a movie set, and obviously there is physicality involved, but it's smoke and mirrors. You looked at that and go, man, The Undertaker could carry on wrestling for 5 years if he wanted to, with that kind of cinematic match. Now, it would appear that The Undertaker's old school mentality says, you know what, if I'm not going to be in the ring, I'm not interested in just showing up and having this cinematic match every year. But even my mind was turning when I saw The Undertaker have the match against AJ Styles at WrestleMania 36, because I thought, you know, people talk about Hulk Hogan. Hulk Hogan having that retirement match, Hulk Hogan having that last big hurrah in WWE. And you looked at that cinematic match and you go, well, maybe someone like Hulk Hogan could pull it off. I even said And I still do at this point, but it won't happen. It won't happen. And this ship has sailed quite a long time ago. But The Undertaker versus Sting, right? It's the dream match. It's the match that everyone always wanted to see. The match we will never see. But it was the dream match, WWE versus WCW. Two mystical, dark, different characters. It really was the match that everyone wanted to see. The sort of fantasticness of both characters. Lightning, crows, blackouts, all of that kind of stuff. It's really what people had dreamed about, and at different points in time, it looked like it was a possibility. Whether or not that was WrestleMania 27, or when Sting made his WWE debut in 2014, 2015, after WrestleMania 31, there was a lot of hope that match could happen, but they were never in the right place at the right time. It's been spoken that maybe The Undertaker wasn't actually that keen to have the match as well. I think now that we know more about it, I think The Undertaker's actually done a few interviews where he said, you know what, I just never had the desire to do it. And I think even Sting has said that now, that maybe if he had come to WWE sooner, we would have seen that match. But ultimately, I think the two things that prevented that match from happening were Sting not coming to the WWE until much, much later in his career, and quite frankly, the lack of desire from The Undertaker to do the match anyway. So you got those two factors, but when I saw the Boneyard match earlier this year at WrestleMania between Taker and AJ Styles, there was a thought in my head of, if they wanted to do this match, they could certainly do it in a cinematic style. Obviously, we know The Undertaker's physical limitations, and we know Sting's physical limitations, which are far worse than The Undertaker. Obviously, Sting had his final match against Seth Rollins, 2015, Night of Champions, Clash of Champions, whatever it was there. I think it was Night of Champions at the time. And obviously he had the neck injury, and they said similar to the Edge situation, one more bump, you could be paralyzed, and you skirted disaster in that match, and it could have been a lot worse. But Sting, by all accounts, has refused to get the corrective surgery for that, because if he gets the corrective surgery, he is officially retired. And he's kind of come up with the mentality of, oh, well, maybe, just maybe, I want to have that final match against The Undertaker. Maybe I want to have that final showdown against The Undertaker. And it's been speculated that Sting didn't get that surgery because he felt that maybe there still was potential to have that final match against The Undertaker. And I looked at that match with AJ Styles earlier this year at WrestleMania, and I did say to myself, if they wanted to do it, they could do it in the cinematic format. You could, a bit of smoke and mirrors, you could look around and sort of skirt some of the issues there. And it did open the door for more cinematic matches with legends that maybe can't step in the ring, whether it is Hulk Hogan, Mick Foley, Steve Austin. I felt all of those matches it was possible, but I think all of them probably would have the same mentality that The Undertaker has had of, it feels like cheating, it feels like not really working, and it's taking a spot from the others. Now, it's not saying that that's what I want to see. Far from it, to be honest. I'm not sure if I really want to see any of those guys competing again, but it did open that possibility, but it looks like it's been shut down by The Undertaker, and I think that would be a similar mentality when it comes to other ex-pro wrestlers in that position. Now, speaking of The Undertaker once again, because again, there's a lot of news when it comes to The Undertaker over the last 24, 48 hours. With The Undertaker's upcoming retirement, it's been speculated what is next for The Undertaker when it comes to his role in WWE. We know he's under contract for, I think it's like 15 years. It's a ridiculously long contract. So what is The Undertaker going to do with WWE now that he's retired? Now, we know, given that he's under contract, he's obviously going to be doing a lot of WWE Network stuff, but it has been speculated and spoken about by the Phenom that The Undertaker is in talks with Triple H about a new WWE role after his Survivor Series retirement. During a recent interview with The Wrap, The Undertaker revealed that he would love to take up a coaching role at the WWE Performance Center and also be involved with NXT in the now known Capitol Wrestling Center. Taker said, quote, that's the pickle I'm in right now, is trying to figure out what lane I want to take. I've been on the road so long that it really doesn't appeal to me, traveling and doing all of that. I love to teach. Triple H and I have had many conversations about me working with the talent there in NXT, in Orlando at the PC, and I really enjoy that. We're just trying to figure out now how it works because I'd have to come in and go out. I live in Texas, so sure, I will do more of that going forward. I think I have a lot to offer. The product is changing and evolving, but I think there's a lot of what I bring to the table that is still applicable to the product, and these guys need to hear it and see someone who has made it work. So we'll see what happens there. It would be huge, it'd be absolutely massive for the WWE to get in someone with the experience like The Undertaker. I mean, having someone who has been at the very peak of WWE for 30 years, I mean, it would be incredible, really. It'd be absolutely incredible, and if WWE can pull that off, that would be monumental for them. Think of a young talent being able to pick the brains of someone like The Undertaker. That would be just huge for the company and huge for the Performance Center and huge for the people working at the Performance Center. I mentioned with the WWE Performance Center and NXT, I think fundamentally the problem there doesn't have anything to do with the coaches or the setup there, because the setup is very good at the Performance Center. The setup is very good with NXT. Fundamentally, the problem when it comes to NXT and anyone that WWE brings through that system is that once they get to Raw and SmackDown, they get destroyed because Vince McMahon doesn't care about what you did at the Performance Center. He doesn't care what you did in NXT, and whatever gimmick you've worked on for years and years at that point gets changed in 5 seconds when it comes to Raw and SmackDown, because that's what Vince McMahon wants. So I think The Undertaker coming in could be great, and it would be awesome for characters down there in NXT. It'd be awesome for the wrestlers at the Performance Center to be taught by The Undertaker. But does it mean anything when you get to Raw and SmackDown and it gets changed completely? I think that is a much bigger conversation to be had there, is that I've mentioned this a few times. Does the WWE Performance Center, does NXT truly work? Does that system truly work? Because I don't know at this point if it does. I really don't know at this point if it does, because when was the last time WWE made a homegrown big male superstar from that Performance Center? They haven't. They just haven't. Female superstars is different. They've done very, very well in creating those female superstars. In recent years, that's kind of dried up, quite frankly, as well. Since we had the 4 horsewomen come to WWE, that's kind of dried up. I think Asuka, but she was an outside hire as well. So when is the last time WWE made a homegrown big male superstar? They haven't. I think the last one is Braun Strowman. And is that the biggest name? Is that the biggest homegrown name? I mean, look at all the superstars that they've got. This is why they struggle to make new stars, because the WWE Performance Center, NXT, works to a point. Talent gets over. They have a gimmick. That is over. And then they get to Raw and SmackDown, and it just gets completely ripped apart to be built back up in the image of Vince McMahon, which is stuck in 1985. That is just the situation there. Now, obviously, as I mentioned, getting The Undertaker in as a coach, it would be massive. It would be absolutely massive for the WWE. It really would. I think The Undertaker has so much knowledge to share. And people will say, well, it's difficult. He lives in Texas. Would he be willing to relocate? Look at someone like Shawn Michaels. People said the same thing about Shawn Michaels. Getting Shawn Michaels in there would be great, but does he want to relocate? He lives in Texas. Shawn Michaels is at that Performance Center every day now, and he loves it. His entire family relocated to Florida. So I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility to say that The Undertaker might not follow the same suit. And if he does, it's a huge get for WWE. It really is. Now, in another WWE news story, WWE has been asking fans about a possible return to live event touring in early 2021. It looks like WWE may at least be considering a return to live event touring early next year. WWE recently issued a fan cancel survey to gauge fan interest on how comfortable they would be with the company running live events again, specifically within the first 3 months of next year. Now, most of the questions dealt with what kind of safety protocols fans think are necessary. These safety protocols would be cleaning stations in the venues, individual seating pods, and if they would feel safe attending the shows. One question in the survey asked, quote, assuming that a WWE live event were coming to a local venue, brackets, arena, stadium, etc., between January 2021 and March 2021, how likely would you be to attend a WWE live event? The options given were very likely, somewhat likely, neutral, somewhat unlikely, and very unlikely. Now, of course, WWE has not toured with regular live events since the pandemic hit back in March. It was reported by many outlets in September that the live events department was, quote, in shambles due to another round of budget cuts that made a significant impact to that division of the company. We've also seen only over the last couple of days that the venue merchandise officer, whatever his title was released from WWE. There is still no timetable for a return to touring, but WWE's new CFO, Christina Salen, noted during the recent Q3 earnings call that the company intends to return to live event touring as quickly and safely as possible. I found this story very, very strange, to be honest. Now, obviously, we've had these reports about vaccines and potential widespread vaccine coming in maybe April of next year, etc. The idea that WWE is considering running live events in January of 2021, I think is just nonsensical, and I don't think will happen. I think WWE knows they won't happen. there have been very conflicting reports when it comes to WWE's live event schedule. We've seen things saying that they're looking to, the end of next year, maybe in the summer of next year. Some people saying 2022. I think fundamentally the live event schedule when it comes to WWE is outdated and needs to change anyway. You look at models like AEW who don't have a live event schedule and they don't need to have one and they're still profitable. I think the idea of talent doing live events 5 days a week, I think that is dead. To be honest, I think that's dead regardless of the pandemic or not. As a money earner and as a revenue earner, whatever you want to call it, it doesn't work anymore. The main revenue when it comes to WWE is by the television rights and the merchandise and licensing. It doesn't come from live events anymore. The idea of having a live event, being a live event business to fund the company is stuck in the 1990s, 1980s. Back in the day, that was what was, the lifeblood of the company, was doing these live events 5 nights a week, sometimes twice at the weekends, twice on Saturdays and Sundays. That was what made the money. Nowadays, that isn't the case. That isn't how it works. And for years and years, we've seen this because the trend is that live event attendance is down. And sometimes WWE tries to counteract this by putting on more live event shows when there isn't a demand for them, quite frankly. So I think the idea that WWE is looking to return to live events in 2021, early 2021 in the first 3 months, I just can't see that happening. I can see fans returning into television tapings at that time, but I think the idea that WWE would be running live events during that period of time and people would be willing to attend those events during that time, I think that's still very much up in the air. There's going to be a lot that's going to change over the next 2 or 3 months. And I think at the moment, just attendance of a live event just seems way, way off the cards to me. So I can't see that. And to be honest, like the CFO of WWE said in that quarter call, we're looking to bring them back and they will bring them back when it's safe, when we're safe to do so. WWE is looking to make as much money as they can, or trying to make much money as they can, because like every company, they've been hurt this year when it comes to the pandemic. So of course they're looking to try and recover from that. But I don't think live events is the way to recover from that. I don't think so. And as I mentioned, I think like the live event business, to be honest, when it comes to pro wrestling, that 5-night-a-week schedule is just, it's dead to me. It really is. Now, a quite disturbing story here from Fightful. This was first reported on Fightful Select, Fightful.com's Patreon service, was that WWE superstars may have potentially gotten their first COVID test at an AEW show earlier this year, and there has been more NXT frustration when it comes to WWE's testing policies and protocols. Now, WWE's handling of the virus during this pandemic has been questionable at best. It took them a long, long time to implement a testing policy and implement even mask wearing in a lot of their venues, whether it's at the Performance Center or the Amway Center. Now, Fightful Select has learned of more frustration that emerged, including an interesting story about WWE's sheer lack of testing earlier this year. Fightful Select found out that earlier this year, at least one wrestler experienced their first test while visiting All Elite Wrestling. In addition, the frustration within NXT continued well into Halloween Havoc, which was only a couple of weeks ago, for handling of testing. Now, WWE came under fire for their lack of testing in the initial stages, and we've heard a story related to that coming out of an AEW pay-per-view this weekend. When discussing AEW COVID protocols with several AEW names, several told Fightful that WWE stars visiting All Elite Wrestling for the Double or Nothing pay-per-view in May actually claimed they got their first test from AEW the weekend of Double or Nothing, because otherwise they weren't permitted at the events or functions. Even after there were positive tests within WWE months prior, the company didn't do testing along the way until mid-June. Also, and this seems not much of a shocker, it seems to be a weekly article at this point, but there was a lot of frustration about NXT's handling of COVID protocols heading into Halloween Havoc. We've seen that Indy Hartwell was pulled from Halloween Havoc in a planned appearance, and several in NXT that were spoken to by Fightful were frustrated with how things have been affected for a story that many looked at in such a positive light. Now, this is crazy. Because even Fightful are reporting now that frustration was compounded when classes then resumed and the same testing protocol was kept in place with not daily testing. Now, what they're referring to is at the Performance Center, they don't do daily testing, which is madness. They do testing maybe twice a week, 3 times a week, not daily. And now, it should be at any other TV tapings when it comes to AEW or WWE. If you're on Raw or SmackDown, you have your test before every single show, the day before every single show. In WWE, it's the day before, and in AEW, it's the day of, but it's a quick response test, so you can get the results back in a couple of minutes. So this is crazy. This is crazy, and this is no new news, to be honest. This is no new news when it comes to WWE's lack of policies earlier this year. It's just more and more frightening. And I said it earlier this year when it came to the big outbreaks that WWE had, especially that Performance Center. When the WWE were running those tapings at the Performance Center, it was disturbing. It was disturbing, the lack of testing and the sheer, I don't even know the word, just the stupidity in response to the pandemic of, I mentioned it a million times, WWE's policy of being able to come into that Performance Center during those tapings were, how do you feel? Fill out this questionnaire. Are you fine? Yeah, okay, you'll come in. By all accounts, they had temperature checks, but they were let in anyway. I mean, it's beyond reckless. It's beyond reckless. And for WWE superstars to attend Double or Nothing, maybe because their partner's there or something like that, and that's where they received their first test, that to me is madness. That to me is absolute madness. And I'm sure we'll find out more in the coming months and years about WWE's lack of reaction to this pandemic. But the fact that they were kept open in Florida because they were an essential business or essential service, whatever the BS claim was, and they weren't even testing people during that, they should be ashamed of themselves. They should be absolutely ashamed of themselves. And finally, a story, we've spoken about The Undertaker a lot here, but finally a story about his kayfabe brother Kane, because Kane has broken his silence on his in-ring future and possible farewell ahead of Survivor Series, of course, where he probably will be in attendance with The Undertaker's final farewell to the WWE. Now, the Big Red Machine and current mayor of Knox County, Tennessee, spoke to Ryan Satin of WWE on Fox in a one-to-one interview special ahead of Survivor Series. Kane said that at 53 years old, he understands his body would not be able to keep up with the current product, but he did add that he will entertain the idea and make a decision of if an opportunity comes up. Kane said, quote, "Well, maybe, I don't know, it just depends. Like I said, you never say never in WWE. But at the same point in time, I've gotten to a point in my life where I'm comfortable not being in the wrestling ring. It's hard work, and I've also gotten to the age where I go a lot of the times, man, that looks like it hurts. I used to be, man, I wish I could go out there doing that. Now I'm kind of like, oh God, those guys are a lot tougher than I am now. But nevertheless, if the opportunity arises, we'll see." So I think with Kane, look, I don't think he's done. I don't think Kane's done when it comes to wrestling his final WWE match. I think he'll have at least one more WWE match. He'll have a farewell match. It seems to me that Kane appears in WWE, even as the mayor of Knoxville, Tennessee, or wherever it is, that he still appears on WWE television at least a couple of times a year. Whether or not it's with Daniel Bryan on SmackDown, or whether it's being Glenn Jacobs for that WWE 24/7 Championship segments he did with R-Truth. I don't think Kane's done in WWE yet, unfortunately. I think he probably has at least another match in him. Who will that be against? I don't know. But just because The Undertaker's retiring, I don't think Kane's going to be retiring soon. I still do think he'll have at least one more match in WWE before he's done. But of course, as always, this is just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on all of those WWE news stories? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll be sure to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys and chatting about WWE here on the channel. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button. It really does help us out here on YouTube. Go up the rankings and get into people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestle News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right hand corner of the screen right now, or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video, along with another video for you to watch. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon.
Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.